have a support system of his own where he can process this, because this is going to be something that he's going to be carrying around as well. And in a situation like this, even if you do separate, this is one of those situations where that resentment doesn't go away. People have separated, but you know, I've had clients who are 4 and 5 husbands or wives from, you know, the first one, and there's still resentment that the people years later, like Scott just said, that's a beautiful example of childhood. I have a couple, I still remember their names from 5th grade, man. I got to go back and make my list. But I think I'd be cautious about you trying to help him with resentment. I would be open, supportive, convey that you're willing to talk when he's ready, but I wouldn't kind of push it. I just do hope that he has a support system where he can get the support he needs, because for me, it was really hard to work through resentments on my own. It was like in an echo chamber in my head. I needed the objective feedback from people, and it was not going to come from the person I had the resentment with. So I think that kind of process is going to take time, but it certainly can be done. And it's so, I'll tell you, when a couple works through these resentments, the healing is quite profound. I think the bond actually gets stronger, but it's all a matter of timing and getting the right help in terms of support for each of you.
Thank you, David. David, we're hearing you fine, but your video is just freezing up almost the whole time. Can you turn your background off? Will that help, maybe?
Let me, I have a video disconnect that might be affecting it.
Could be.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, you sound better now even. So I want to reiterate David's last point there. I know when I'm angry at somebody, that is usually not the person that I want to get emotional support from about my anger. I really don't want to hear from the person I'm angry with. You know, I have to, and thankfully I have a pretty big support network, and I can turn to other people to work through those things. You know, I think Dr. Rob, in an instance like this, would say, you know, you need to be honest, completely honest. You need to take responsibility, and you need to, as David said, show some empathy. You know, just say, I messed up. This is what I did. You know, I feel really bad because I hurt you. I know, you know, that kind of thing. So let's go to our next question here. Resentment's a very important topic. I am angry and resentful very often, especially when life is confusing. Mine has been for over a year now, no income, etc. Which steps again? I think we're talking about which steps to work on resentments. How do you deal with resentment against life in general and God? Because I really don't like how God made me in general. Even in drop-in groups, sometimes I feel attacked because I feel like I'm powerless to make any sense or direction in my life, what to do, how much, and how to do the gratitude stuff. A lot of questions in there. Have at it, David.
Okay. Yeah, there's some great questions in there. I think it's not unusual to be experiencing a lot of anger, resentment pretty constantly. I think probably the last couple of years of my addiction and probably the first couple of years of my recovery were almost the worst for those as I worked them through. So the steps that I referred to that I think are the key, certainly the big one is the 4th step, where we take an inventory of ourselves and what we've done and really take a serious look. And I think that's one that I avoided as long as I could. I think a lot of addicts do, but it's a really critical step to start to understand sort of the nuts and bolts of my personal constellation of resentments and to really start to move past them. The other steps that I think are helpful are step 10 and 12, which is steps 10 is continue to take personal inventory and admitted we were wrong when we needed to, and promptly admitted it is the wording. And then 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God. Again, having a connection with someone outside ourselves. So I think those steps are really kind of the 4th one being the key, and then the maintenance steps of the 10th and 11th really provide a framework to start to work through some of these resentments. And there's many different formats to do this. You know, there's the big books has some suggestions of mini workbooks, there's worksheets. So you can kind of play around with it, but I might suggest that you look at some of those inventory formats in the different fellowships and see if there's one that resonates with you. Because I think what I get from your question is that you're kind of caught up in this kind of swirl of resentments and often no specifics. And I think sometimes, for me at least, when I was in that space, which I was quite often, having a worksheet, questions that kind of guided me through the process, the very black and white, objective, that really helped me start to get clarity on it. So I'd really investigate some of the workbooks that are out there, the worksheets. I'm sure there's stuff online, a lot of tools for you. And then the life in general, that's a tough situation because you can't really, there's not a good way to attack that. I think I would try to really be more specific in that. What areas of your life? You mentioned income, some other factors. I think those kind of things are important to really be as specific as possible to help you break it down in a way that's useful for you. And then, oh dear, Scott, I lost my camera. There we are.
You there?
Yeah, and then I'm having trouble with my screen tonight, sorry.
Okay, well, I'm going to jump in for a second while you fix your screen.
Okay.
Step 4, I totally agree with David, is the jumping off point for most addicts in terms of really dealing with resentments. I have, when I did step 4 and when I work with sponsees, I have them list all sorts of things, their bad behavior and whatever. And one of the things we always list is resentments that we have against people, places, things, entities, whatever. And then, there are some columns to fill in after that. And, what part of my life is affected by this? What am I feeling? And the last, there's a couple others. And the very last column is, what is my part in this? And that was the big one for me. When I did my step 4, I realized I had a part in every single resentment that I had. And I kind of realized I'm not surrounded by assholes. I am the asshole. The example I used earlier with these guys from middle school that I just hated, when I did the 4th step on them, the last column was, I started it. I started the feud. I did it. It was my fault. And I had never gotten to that point until I did a 4th step on it and realized, oh, are you kidding me? So now I have a resentment that I probably need to make an amends if I ever run into them again, but I'll deal with that later. So that's my take on step 4. It looks like David is back up now, so I will. Yeah,
I am. I just wanted to say a couple more things about this question. In terms of feeling attacked, sometimes I feel attacked because I feel like I'm powerless to make any sense of direction in my life. And I think that rings so true of me in my early recovery, because I felt really out of place in meetings or in drop-in groups or support groups because I wasn't getting it. My world, it just didn't make sense. And I think probably my brain was a little fuzzy still from all my addiction stuff. But it took me a while to figure out. I was like, this switch we do in recovery is a whole reorientation of how we see ourselves in the world and how we move through the world. And I think there's this middle space in there where it is confusing and it was really hard for me to get clear and get objective. So I would just ask you to have patience on that. Keep coming back, have patience, be present, don't take it personally, and I think just show up. And if there's a support group where you feel that consistently, I'd get another support group, because who needs the hassle? But I think just really stick in there. And your last part of the question was about gratitude and how much and how to do the gratitude stuff. I like to keep it really simple. And that's the most powerful thing for me is a gratitude list. And it doesn't have to be a major opus. It can be 5 things, it can be 10 things. I try to do one every day. It doesn't have to be huge, momentous things. It can be little stuff. This morning I was grateful for my coffee. And whatever, but I think it can also be more meaningful things sometimes. But I would encourage you to just be patient with yourself. That's why I had mentioned earlier on that self-compassion. Just be gentle with yourself, be gentle with those around you, and just keep moving forward one step at a time.
Yeah. And as far as having a resentment against God, when I run up against that with people, I always say, maybe you're talking to the wrong God. I know I was when I got into recovery. I had to find a new higher power. There's all sorts of exercises that can walk you through the process of finding a higher power that works for you. That's how I got rid of that resentment. David, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I had, as I mentioned, I had some experience with that too, and I think I had to kind of rework my assumptions about God, and actually that led to a kind of a deepening of and a change of my relationship with a new higher power in a way. I kind of revamped it because I was still stuck in the childhood Sunday school God that was not very friendly or helpful to me, and I think actually healing that resentment helped me create it created an opportunity to have a better relationship with a different higher power that's much more powerful in my life today. So yeah, I think it's I would say that's probably, I don't know, Scott, what do you think of if it's almost a universal thing with addicts about God and resentments of God? I think probably it's very common, if not universal, that this happens. And I think a lot of it happens like it happened to me, where we make bargains with God for stuff. You know, God will do great things if you save my marriage, and then the marriage falls apart. And then we're pissed at God instead of understanding what we may have done to it. So I think, again, it's a matter of kind of teasing out the role, the expectation, but always coming back to what part to we play in this. And one other thing I'd add to that, I ask this sometimes in clients, what do I need for myself in that? And that's a weird question to ask, but I think, what do I need? I need to be able to love myself. I need to support myself. I need to be able to provide I need to be able to regulate my feelings without somebody else having to help me with it. There's things like that when I'm feeling resentment, it's usually something that I can provide for myself that I'm expecting other people to do for me. So I like to kind of look at that too, like what's going on here? What do I need? And can I provide that for myself? It's a good exercise.
Yeah. I love this next question here. A lot of my resentment is the result of my lack of ability to say no, especially to my partner. He makes a demand and I give in because I am trying to avoid confrontation. Then I carry the resentment. Is it better to learn not to give in so readily or to learn to release resentment?
Wow. That is like a classic scenario of that lack of ability to say no. And I think I identify with that a lot myself, where I just want to please, I want to say yes, I want to be a good guy, and so I kind of go along, but I haven't really been true to myself sometimes, or true to my feelings, and it's a kind of an integrity issue where I will say something, but it's not really what I feel, and that I know absolutely where that came from. That came from my childhood home, where that was a survival technique. That's how I got through. So I think it's really important to have clear boundaries, have a clear self-knowledge of what you need and want, and how you can do that, and what you can do for him, and where that stops, and where there's some overlap. So I think those are perfect seeds for resentment, because we go along with something, and then we don't like it, and we become a victim. And that cycle then repeats into addictive behavior, and the whole thing rolls forward. So your question was, is it better to learn not to give in so readily, or to learn to release resentment? I think both are important in that I don't think it's a matter of learning not to give in so readily. In a way that's true, but I would frame it in a different way. I would say to really be true to what you're feeling, or thinking and feeling, and be willing to speak up and express your needs, and express what you want. I think oftentimes addicts are classic avoiders. We avoid conflict, we avoid upsetting people, we're people pleasers, and we don't want to upset anybody or upset the apple cart, and then we just end up getting resentment ourselves. So I'd speak your truth, speak your truth. We do it kindly, we don't do it cruelly, we don't do it to clobber somebody, but it's okay to have an opinion, it's okay to have a feeling, and to talk about it. And so I think that's one aspect of it, is really speaking your truth. And then it's also important to learn how to release those resentments, because we are just a catch-all of miscellaneous resentments that part of the recovery process, a big part of the recovery process is learning how to identify those and let them go, because they just suck away our life force and energy. So yeah, so the long, short answer to your question is to really speak your truth, but also learn how to take responsibility when the issue is yours, and own it and change if necessary.
Yeah, I had to learn pretty early in recovery that to trust my gut. I mean, I literally carry my feelings in my gut, and I had, if my gut was screaming no and my mouth was saying yes, I knew I was going to have a resentment. And for me, resentment is one of the worst feelings I can have. I'm not good with boredom. I'm not good with loneliness, but resentment is a killer for me, and it'll take me back out. So I had to learn to say no. I had to learn that no is a complete sentence, and it doesn't require any explanation,
Right.
usually. But that was hard.
Right. And also, just so one more thing about that question, he said he makes a demand, and I think one of the things we do in couples therapy is to really help couples start to communicate more effectively, where they can express their needs and wants, not so much in terms of demands, but in terms of preferences and behavior change requests and things like that. But I think that language gets into a triggering language where we start to act defensively, or we get into a shoving match that is unnecessary. So yeah, be cautious about how you approach each other, and remember, empathy and compassion go a long way in this game.
Yeah, there's a great book by Sue Johnson about emotionally focused therapy called Hold Me Tight. Is that it, David?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, that would be a good one for you and your partner maybe to read together, because it has so much great information about how to communicate in ways where you don't piss each other off. It's kind of amazing. So next question here. How might I best work through my resentments and understand and acknowledge my role while not going self-negative and beating myself up?
That's a really great question. And it's a really logical one too, because it's this weird paradox where a resentment is really caused by not taking responsibility, but part of that kind of grandiose victimhood is that we're the worst person in the world. And so it's this kind of weird thing to try to hold at the same time, two different thoughts. I think it's a really great question, because it's easy to fall into that idea of like, oh my God, I've taken responsibility, take responsibility for everything. And I think that's something we have to find balance as well, because we're not responsible for all the evils in the world, but we have to really recognize our role. So I think it's finding a balance between an honest look, and I always like that word honesty, and the word humility, which comes from honesty. Just, I think of that as terms of recognizing our strengths, recognizing our weaknesses, or an honest appraisal of ourselves. So to really kind of have that balanced, focused viewpoint, without dropping into that sort of, oh my God, I'm the worst person in the world. And one way I think is important to monitor that, that's useful and easy relatively, is to really monitor your self-talk. Because while you're going through this process of dealing with resentments, working them through, that little self-chatter in your ear, and whatever it says, whether you're the worst person in the world, or you're so stupid, how could you do this again, or whatever the stuff is, I think to really be aware of that and start to not succumb to that, but start to change it and say, I made mistakes, but I'm trying to correct them, and whatever the affirmation format needs to be, I think is a really useful thing to not get lost in this process, because, and that's why I think what people avoid the fourth step so much. It's a hard, difficult process, incredibly cleansing process and a freeing process as well, but it really requires taking an honest look at what we've done. And part of that honesty is not saying that we're the worst person in the world and falling into that trap of kind of self-pity and being a victim. So finding that balance is tricky, but I think I think it's a great awareness you have that is a potential pitfall, that we fall back into this beating ourselves up when we're going through it. I have found that when I'm in that space, it's really hard for me to talk myself out of that. So I really rely on friends and program people to kind of help me with that. And I've given kind of permission to my close friends, like, if you see this or that, please tell me, because I need to learn. And the people in our networks and our social support networks can really become mirrors for ourselves and give us that feedback that sometimes when we're stuck in that echo chamber, it's really hard to figure out ourselves. So make sure you're connected with people that you trust and that can support you.
Yeah, David, I want to pull something from our chat feature here. I had mentioned Sue Johnson's book, Hold Me Tight, and one of our participants also suggested Marshall Rosenberg's book on nonviolent communication, and he has a section in there on demand. I actually think Sue Johnson was a protege of his, but I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, that nonviolent communication book is something we a standard reading assignment and treatment for us, so for a lot of people. So it's a great book. Excellent. Thank you for doing that.
Okay, this next question ties into our last one. I keep hearing, be gentle with yourself, love yourself, but how? Another good question.
Yeah. Boy, I don't have a magic trick to pull out for that. For me, I explain my process. Being gentle with myself took a long time. I had to do it. And it wasn't overnight. I sort of learned it gradually, but it really started to happen when I was on my fourth step, and I had a really bad reaction initially to doing it. That same kind of thing we talked about, beating myself up, and my God, I'm so horrible. How could I ever even recover? And to really learn with the gentle coaxing of my sponsor and a couple friends to kind of start to reframe that and to really change the self-talk. And for me, that was the key to kind of really start to look at those core beliefs I had myself, like I'm really damaged goods, I'm the worst person in the world, I'm never going to succeed, or whatever the beliefs are, and to really start to rewire those and reframe them. But the self-compassion for myself, the ability to really treat myself gently, took time, because I mentioned in the beginning of this webinar that we hold resentments of other people, but mostly we hold them of ourselves. And I really have a lot of resentments of myself, that the things I've done, the mistakes I made, part of it was choices I made, part of it was who I am. And a lot of my addiction was about struggling with coming out as a gay man. And I hated myself for this thing that I had no choice about. And so a lot of those resentments kind of had to be worked through. And I will say it took time to learn to be gentle with myself. And I had to learn it by experiencing other people being gentle with me before I could do it. And I had to reach a threshold of clearing out all the stuff about myself that I disliked. And that took time as well. But it does happen, and it does get easier. And it's something that's really important, because I think if we continue to clear up resentments at everybody else, but hold them about ourselves, we're going to be in trouble. Because it's those resentments, those internal things that really eat away at us in a way that it's quite debilitating. So trust the process, work through, follow the steps, and I think surround yourself with loving people who care for you and who are going to be honest with you and be tough with you when it's required and be gentle with you when it's required. And for me, it was a matter of almost like being re-socialized. Like we socialize children and a family and a healthy family. I had to learn how to be socialized in a healthy family, except my healthy family was my recovery family. And it was like learning all that all over again. Scott, what was your experience? I'm just curious of your case.
Well, let me pull this comment which I think is a good one. What would you say to yourself if you weren't you, if you were just a kind outside observer? I think that's a good thing to think about. Yeah, David, this sends me on the same path as you. It's the shame tapes between the ears that tell us we suck over and over and over and over, and we're unworthy and unlovable and this and that. And they were installed very, very early in life by other people. We learn shame from other people. We are not born with shame. We learn it. We learn that we're not good enough and that we're unworthy and we're unlovable. And we have to unlearn that the same way, which is with other people. And it's a process. My experience, it was slow. First I trusted a therapist who listened to me and said supportive things and, didn't run away or say, no, I can't work with you, or, all these things that I thought were going to happen if I told the truth. And I let the truth out in little tiny bits, testing the waters. And then I, started going to 12-step meetings, and once in a while I would let out a little bit, and people would nod their head and go, oh yeah, I did that. And not judge me. And it took a long, long time. And I was 5 or 6 years sober before the people that I was hanging out with got the whole story. And I finally just kind of had them over for dinner. I was like, okay, here's all the shit about me. I just want you to know who you're friends with, so you can make a fully informed decision. And they were like, okay. And everybody else started sharing. It was great. But
is that before dessert or just?
It was before dessert even. Yeah. But it was a process, and it was scary. And I needed other people to be gentle with me before I could do it myself. I remember going into my first 12-step meetings, and people would say, our job is to love you until you can love yourself. And, that made my skin crawl, but I get it now. I was not capable of loving myself. I had too much shame, and it was too deep, and there was just way too much work to do for me to be kind and gentle to myself at that time.
And I just want to underscore that point because it's so important that we talk about resentments as, we think of those as actions we've done, things we've done. But I think a lot of the resentments at ourselves are for things that we have no power over, like who we are, our sexual orientation, or the ways our bodies look, or things like that we were taught shame about. And that really takes time because those are so deep and old. And those things are at least in my case, were the drivers of my addiction. Those are the feelings that was like the original sin in terms of trying to get away, trying to escape from those uncomfortable feelings. So I really had to address those in recovery. It wasn't just, about the bully in 7th grade or some messed up partner that I had a bad relationship with, but really about who I was and who I thought I was, who I was told I was, and given a lot of shame as a kid. So all that deep stuff, it takes time and patience.
David, in one of your readings, I can't remember which one it was, but it equated resentments with being a spiritual disease. Could you talk about that for a second, and what resentments do to us?
Yeah, so in my case, resentments just kind of eat away at connections. It eats away at my connection to myself, feeling good about myself, but it also erodes a sense of well-being and a sense of connection and a sense of confidence in a power greater than myself, whether that's the meeting or Shiva or God or whatever you want it to be. That it's like a block on that connection, that channel to really what has turned out to be a central support system in my life, my kind of spiritual practices. It cuts that off, and because for me, and it's almost a physical sensation. If I'm having resentment, I feel like I'm in a bubble. I feel closed off and disconnected, and in this internal world that's in turmoil. And it can really be trapped. I can feel trapped in that. And I think that's kind of the opposite of when I'm feeling spiritually connected, which is kind of in the flow, in the channel. One example, I'm a writer, and the way I write is to kind of get clear and just kind of let it come. And I really feel like I'm kind of in a channel, and I'm kind of downloading stuff almost. If I have a resentment going on, or if I have some kind of uncomfortable feeling, I am totally disconnected from that. There's no way I can access that because I'm caught up in this internal turmoil that just interrupts all that. So for me, that the spiritual connection is a very real thing in terms of my creativity and my voice, my creative voice. And I really see it if I'm not in a good place, that I can't access it, it's gone. So yeah, it does have an impact on me, for sure, for me.
So we got another interesting question here. I haven't heard you say anything about forgiveness. Does it play a role here? If so, how? And I'm curious to see if David and I have the same answer.
Yeah, I think forgiveness is huge in this role. I think forgiveness is a huge tool in releasing resentment because it's not for the other person, right? It's not me being generous and saying, I forgive you for whatever you may or may not have done that I experienced some resentment about. Forgiveness for me is this incredible release of the burden of the resentment. It's saying, okay, I'm going to release this because I don't want to carry it anymore. And it's free. And I'm sure we've all had the experience of sometimes we go through a forgiveness process and sometimes it's received well, sometimes it's not received so well. But that really is almost irrelevant because the act of forgiveness is really releasing the space in our heads that situation is occupied, or the consuming anger and feelings we've had. I'll also say, I think it's really important, and I'm going to circle back to that self-compassion. It's really important to forgive ourselves for this. And that's not to skirt away from taking responsibility or owning what we've done or making amends or fixing the damage we've done. And we do a lot of damage, both to ourselves and people around us. But it's really important. I think we hit a wall in recovery if we can't ultimately forgive ourselves for what we did. And I go back to that expression we use a lot in the treatment program, which is, I'm a good person that did bad things. And I think if for me at least, I had to separate myself, who I was as a person, a really good person, from shitty things I did, pardon my language. And I think that the way I did that was forgiving myself and not skirting responsibility, but really being forgiving myself. And so that's kind of my take on forgiveness. Scott, you're on.
Yeah, I have a slightly different answer.
Okay.
I'm not big on forgiveness. What I am big on is acceptance of reality. And I think that's a lot of what David was saying, maybe just with a different word. But for me, it's really not about forgiving people for what they've done or forgiving myself for what I've done. It's accepting it and letting go of my need to control it. And that's the relief for me, is letting go of my need to control a situation that is either already past and I can't control, and often I never could control. And I don't forgive myself for some of the things I've done. I accept what I've done, and I've learned lessons, and I've found gratitude in the lessons that I've learned, because I think I'm a better person for having learned those lessons. But some of the things, a lot of the things I've done, I forgive myself, but some of them are not so nice, and I don't really want to forgive myself because I don't know. That's me, and I think it's David's answer using a different word in a lot of respects. I don't know. So.
Scott, there's a comment in the chat that might be useful here. It says forgiveness is crucial, but only when you're ready. Self-compassion is part of self-forgiveness. If you can forgive yourself, it helps to release animosity forgiving other people, in my opinion, is not necessarily
Not necessary.
not necessary. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's all about. It really comes back to us, I think. And, yeah.
But I also find that when I accept the past for what it is and find the lesson in it and move forward, I'm no longer beating myself up about, whatever resentment I have against myself. So again, I think it's the same thing, just with different language.
And I kind of agree with you, Scott, because I was just thinking of, for example, in my own case, I had a lot of resentment about my parents, and again, being a young gay boy in the Midwest in a different time and place, and having a lot of struggles with that. So I had a lot of resentments at my parents, especially my father. And really, the process, and I sort of forgave him in my recovery, but what it really was, and this has really helped me clarify it tonight, is I accepted him. I accepted him as a man from a different generation who had his own baggage, who had his own beliefs. And so it really was a process of acceptance as well. Yeah, thanks for that clarification for me. I appreciate it.
And I think in part of partner recovery is, accepting each other. I think it's more about accepting each other and still loving each other than actually saying, I forgive you, or, whatever. I would rather be accepted than forgiven. That's just me. So we are pretty much out of time. Great crowd tonight and great questions. Thank you, everybody. David, you want to do a little recap or take us out?
Yeah, just resentments are common. They are this unprocessed turmoil of anger and fear and resentment that we need to release. I think we have a great pathway and steps to do that. And it's an amazing process. It's tough, but it's very freeing and liberating. It has been, at least in my case. So yeah, this is a great conversation. I've learned a lot tonight myself, and appreciate that. I also want to just throw out there, if people have ideas for topics, make sure you send them in, because we're happy to accommodate if you have something you want to hear about.
Yeah, just click the contact us button in the top right of the sexandrelationshiphealing.com screen, and you can send us an email and say, hey, I've got a topic for David. This was a massive one. We may have to revisit this one in a few months.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you, David. We'll be back
you.
next Wednesday, and I need to apologize before we sign out. I forgot to hit the record button until we were about 20 minutes in, so we missed David's opening comments. I'm so sorry, but we got most of the Q&A. So
I have a resentment about that, Scott.
Yes, we'll work on it. So, thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.